There's a top-secret plane hidden away in an old warehouse in Nizhny Novgorod in Russia, which is officially known as the Rescuer, but it's never completed a single rescue mission. The Spazatel project was supposed to result in the creation of an ekranoplan, capable of flying at high speed over water by making use of the ground effect. The Russians started work on the project during the 1990s with the original intention of building a missile carrier, but during the initial construction process the plan changed, and the team responsible for it were tasked with turning the plane into a state-of-the-art sea rescue ambulance instead. The shell of the aircraft inside the warehouse today is said to be around 90% finished, but it looks increasingly likely that the remaining 10% will never be built. Government funding was withdrawn from the project because it was taking too long, and all the workers were sent home. A group of ekranoplan enthusiasts is still trying to raise enough funds to finish the job to this day, but it looks like a futile effort. General Motors are a large and successful company, but not every idea they've ever had was a good one. The EV1 was an early attempt to build a functional, desirable electric car, but the project was a failure, and it's widely thought that GM ordered every single one of the vehicles to be destroyed when they abandoned the concept. But it appears that at least one of them managed to escape its fate. The cars were only available to be leased rather than bought when they were released in the 1990s, and GM recalled every single one of them when the leases came to an end. We guess someone didn't feel like returning their car. This one is parked up in a garage in Atlanta, Georgia, and it looks like it's been there for a very long time. It doesn't have a license plate, and a coat of dust this thick doesn't appear overnight. One possible explanation is that some EV1s were sent to research and educational facilities after the recall, and the car park is close to Georgia Tech. The idea of a laser tank sounds like something from a James Bond movie, but the concept is far from fictional. In fact, it was very nearly turned into a reality by the Soviet Union during the 1980s. This is the 1K-17 Shadi, which American intelligence referred to as the Stiletto. The self-propelled vehicle is a Mista-S chassis with a mounting of laser projectors in the turret. The lasers weren't designed to cut into enemy vehicles. Instead, they were intended to disable the optical electrical components of enemy tanks, planes, and even missiles. Work on the tanks began in the 1970s and continued for over a decade, although the project was compromised when the Pentagon obtained plans for the tanks from a defector. As with many pieces of military technology that were being tested at the time, the Shadi was abandoned when the Soviet Union collapsed. Analysis of the plans suggests that they were likely to be too expensive to be created in bulk anyway. The laser system involved firing concentrated light through a 60-pound cluster of artificial rubies, with the laser optics contained at the end of a spiral coated in silver. Looking at this almost triangular car, you could almost think that it's a prop from a retro science fiction television show, but it was once thought to be the future of mail delivery. Built in 1980 by a Floridian company called Commuter Vehicles Inc., this all-electric vehicle was years ahead of its time. The Postal Service was impressed enough by the design to order 375 units, but only 231 of them had been delivered before serious design flaws started to become evident. Motor failures were common, and the Postal Service fell out with the company that built the cars over the terms of the warranties. The matter ended up in court. The vehicles were parked up, and the remainder of the order was canceled. Although information is scarce, it's thought that the postal delivery cars were modeled on the City Car, an earlier experimental electric car that was designed during the 1970s. With a range of fewer than 40 miles for each charge, it's likely that the vehicles were ultimately considered to be as impractical as they were unreliable. We all know what a military tank looks like today, but that's only because the concept of a tank has had decades to evolve into the perfect shape. Back when the idea of a tank was still new, many different designs were trialed, such as this Russian Tsar tank from 1915. For a supposedly armored vehicle, it looks very flimsy, so you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear that it never made it beyond the prototype stage. With its two enormous front wheels, it looked more like a bicycle than a tank, and moved more like one as well. The Tsar tank performed acceptably when it was tested on roads and hard surfaces, but as soon as it was tested on a field to assess how it would perform on a muddy battlefield, it immediately got stuck in the mud and would go no further. Multiple attempts by the designers of the tank to free it failed, and the test had to be abandoned almost as soon as it had been begun. Legend has it that the designers were so embarrassed by the failure that they left the tank in the field, and it stayed there until 1923 when it was taken apart so the steel could be scrapped. The McBarge was built to prove that McDonald's could make a floating restaurant and could, therefore, take fast food anywhere in the world. Nowadays, it's proof that McDonald's doesn't always clean up its mess. The barge was created for the Expo World Fair of 1986 in Vancouver, Canada, and served thousands of business people and guests who attended the fair. When the festival came to an end, McDonald's removed all of their supplies and equipment and left Vancouver with a 180-foot-long barge floating in its waters that nobody could find a use for. The steel and glass design of the barge was probably considered innovative for the 1980s, but without anyone to care for it, it hasn't aged well, and is now something of a rusty embarrassment. Surprisingly, even though it's been more than 30 years since anybody went inside, the hull is still watertight, and the barge is still considered to be operational. There was even talk of someone turning it into a bar in 2015, but 5 years have passed and there's been no sign of renovation work commencing. How much longer will it be left here?